expect that an air rifle forum such as the AGF would be capable of finding the true location of the Agincourt battlefield. However, its membership is made up of people from all walks of life, including myself, who was educated in certain fields which came in handy. What started out as a simple question on this thread turned into a quest of not just trying to find a battlefield, but understanding why both armies ended up in that location, the topography of Agincourt back in the day as opposed to now, today, the French objectives, Henry's objectives, the strategy of both armies, and the graves where everybody ended up when it were all over. That was our quest, in which we succeeded, because of certain underlying factors that everybody else missed. So we begin with the official battlefield. In 2003 a survey was done from north of Agincourt to just north of Maisonsell, and not one single artefact was found. Quite a comprehensive survey, similar to this one, done at Taunton, and there were no arrowheads, no horse harness pendants, armour buckles, parts of swords, lances, knives, nothing. Not one single artefact. When it was done at Taunton, they found arrowheads like these, all kinds of artefacts, too numerous to talk about on here. So it's quite impossible for that battle to have taken place in that location. But it's like when we discuss this, and the general consensus of the forum is that the French locals probably know where it is, because those farmers over the last 600 years, they're going to find things when they're farming. Someone somewhere knows where it is, and they're going to find things. They're going to find arrowheads, they're going to find military equipment, bits of swords, even bones. Limbs were cut off. So they're going to be finding stuff. And we think it's a little bit of a joke on English, sending them to the wrong place. I think the French authorities might also suspect it's not there. And it's a little bit of a joke to the English, and a little bit of retribution for the battle. So that's what we think. So we completely have to discount the official battlefield and look elsewhere, and that's what it were all about. You know, the 2003 survey is what set this whole thing off, and that set us on a quest to find where it actually is. But you can't find where it is just by looking for a battlefield. You have got to take lots of factors into consideration, and we're now going to go through all those factors. But here's just a few words from a fictional archaeologist before we do that.
They're digging in the wrong place.
Right, as tools that we're going to use is the testament of Geste Enrique Quincy, who was a chaplain in the English army, who wrote his testimony 2 years later. We're going to use good old Google Earth to find disturbances and trauma in the soil structure that are important to us. Old maps that members of the forum searched hours for online to help us understand the topography of the land now as opposed to then. but more importantly the strategies of both armies which led them to the battlefield, which we're going to show you later on in the video. Well, I'm going to show you, because it's the objectives and the strategy of both armies that are more important than finding the battlefield. That's where the official narrative goes incredibly wrong, because Agincourt has got no strategic importance to this story whatsoever, and that's what we're going to prove. So we're going to start with the French. What were the French objectives? Right, the French objective is quite simple. They've got to stop Henry from getting on the Hesdin-Calais road, because once he gets on there and he gets closer to the port of Calais, he's actually got friends. He runs them provinces, so he's going to get help. You know, during the 100 Years' War, the English took all of that real estate off the French. So the French have to stop him. As soon as he gets over the river Termoise, they've got to stop him. And there's only 3 places he can cross. The French crossed the Somme first, a few days earlier, and they got there first. And I call it the Beaucamp Triangle, because Henry either crosses at Blangy, Orchy, Les, Hesdin, or Hesdin. But typically what Henry's been doing is avoiding fortified towns, because he don't want any more trouble. He wants to get home without a fight, because his army's in disarray. It's in quite a mess. Lost a lot of soldiers through dysentery, cold, starvation. They're in quite a mess. They're on the run basically through the French countryside. So the French beat them to it, and it's quite a cunning plan, because if he crosses at Blangy, he's got to sweep round south of Maisencelle, you know, on where I've marked in red, and the Calais road is green. I've marked in green. Whichever route he takes, the French have got him, because they've placed their forces between Agincourt and Beaucamp, right? So they're covering the Hesdin road itself, the Hesdin-Calais road itself, they're covering the middle route, and they're covering the route from Blangy. Henry sent a scout ahead, and he came back with the news and told Henry that the French are 1 league ahead, which is 3.5 miles. When you measure that on the map on Google Earth, it's exactly between Agincourt and Beaucamp where the French were. So that's the first indication that Quincy is correct in his testimony, because that's what he put in his testimony. So that's the French objective, just to stop Henry getting on the Calais road. Agincourt, which is the official battlefield, or the side of, has got no strategic importance whatsoever. There's no way in a million years that Henry, who's keeping away from fortified towns, is going to go through that gap between Agincourt and Agincourt, past Agincourt Castle, a fortification. He's asking for trouble. And that's where the official narrative goes wrong. There's just no way he's going to go. It's only 250 yards wide is the gap. There's no way he's going to go up there. He's going to take one of these 3 routes. And as it happens, he took the Blangy crossing because that's less populated. Remember, he's keeping away from fortified towns. And that's what he did. He skirted round the bottom of Maisencelle. And that's where they first clocked the French on the right as they were swinging round, which is exactly what our witness says. That they skirted round bottom of Maisencelle, looked over to the right, and saw a huge French force. So we now get on to the objective of the English, which I've explained much of it. But the objective of the English is to skirt through the French countryside, avoiding fortified towns, sneaking around, trying to avoid the French army, trying to get to past the Calais and get home without a battle. The last thing on the mind is a battle. And they're the circumstances that lead to the Battle of Agincourt that Henry is blocked on all three routes in the Beaucamp Triangle. There's no way, he can't go back because he faces winter. It's getting colder. We're almost into November. It's getting colder by the night. His men are starving. They've got dysentery. He can't go back. There's only one way, and that's northwest. And the French are smart, and they outsmarted him on this occasion. But that's the only time that they did. We weren't the only ones that suspected that the battlefield were between Beaucamps and Agincourt. As you can see from this old map, there is actually a battle indicator, which filled us full of confidence that we were on the right tracks. But just going back to the 24th, the evening before the battle, on this plan, I'm going to use this Ordnance Survey map. It's probably Victorian, but it's got woods on it that are not on modern maps, so I'm going to use it from now on to explain, because the woods are on it. So Henry comes up round the bottom of Mason's Hill, and the French army's over to his right, and there's a standoff for 2 hours. Nobody moves. Henry's just positioned, just watching the French army, wondering what it's going to do. Meanwhile, he sent a messenger to Charles, who were in charge of the French, with a plea bargain that if he gave all his lands up in Pas de Calais back to the French for safe passage back to England, right, that would be a good trade-off. And Charles's reply was, I can smell the dysentery on you. You've got nothing left from which to bargain with. So the answer was not clearly no. Anyway, there were a standoff for a couple of hours. It was starting to get dark. It were obvious there wasn't going to be a battle. So what the French did, they actually started to retreat back to Beaucamp for the evening to make camp in Agincourt. And Henry, mistakenly, thought they were going to flank him round the wood. You see the wood in front of the English? Because the army started moving southwest back towards Beaucamp, back towards camp, Henry mistook it for an attack, and he thought they were going to flank him around the wood, but they never did, and I'll show you what Quinty says about that and why that wood's important. But basically, the French retired. Henry set a formation up thinking he were going to be outflanked, he were going to be attacked, and that is more or less the formation that he set up. He put his archers on each flank, and he set a formation up just in case the French came round the outside of the wood and then came round the other side of the wood and attacked him from both sides. But that didn't happen, and I'll show you the picture in a while of where both armies camped that evening and the fires that the French lit and the consequences of why they lit those fires, and we'll move from there. So I'm going to read to you now an excerpt from the testimony of Quinty when the English were watching the French and wondering what they were going to do. So he states, when for a while the opposing ranks had seen and considered our measure and smallness of number, they brought themselves to a field that lay beyond a wood. He's talking about the field behind the wood to his left, which was near on the left of us, between them, us and them, where our route to Calais was. Our king, supposing that the men would thus either encircle the wood so that they could come upon us via that route, or else go around the more distant wood that neighboured it. That's the lower wood that you can see on the map that is actually connected to the bottom of Beaucamps. There's two woods. There's the first wood and then there's another one behind it. So he's talking about the French going round both of them woods all the way around the back of the English and encircling them. That's what he's talking about. So where did I get to? Go around the more distant woods that neighboured it and surround us on every side. So Henry immediately removed his columns and positioned them in constant opposition to them, right? So Henry positions his army to face the woods, just in case they flank both woods and surround them. And then he goes on to say, when eventually, after some delay, we had almost reached sunset, the Frenchmen perhaps saw the war was not going to be waged, as it was not appropriate around nightfall, and entered the hamlets and the shrubbery nearby, intending to rest until morning. So what it's saying is that Henry's made a mistake. I don't think that the French were going to attack the English at that time of day anyway, and they were just retreating back into bow camps. Bow camps, incidentally, is Latin, and it means these camps. So that town or village were named after that war, these camps. And so that's a slight tactical error by Henry, but he had to cover himself, because when he sees them coming round the back of those two woods, he immediately assumes that there's going to be a imminent attack. So he has to lay his army out in defence of the position that he's in, because he's in between Macencell and Agincourt, so he has to defend that position. But then it becomes apparent that the French were just retreating into bow camps for the evening. And so what we're going to do, the wood in between Macencell and bow camps is very important strategically in the battle. And I'm going to show you on old maps where this wood is. So if we flick to this map, here you see the woods there, both of them. The one connected to bow camps and the one between bow camp and Agincourt and Macencell. And then again, same two woods, and then again, same two woods. So we know that them woods were there, and we know that Quinty were talking super accurate in his description of the battle and everything that preceded the battle. And if you're walking up to the official battlefield, there's no woods. You know, even on the old maps, there's no woods for this to have taken place. It can't have happened on the official battlefield. It can only ever have happened here, because this is the only place around Agincourt where those two woods that Quinty talks about, this is the only place it could have happened. So we know that we're in the right place. At this point we don't know where the battle is exactly, but we know we're in the right place. So now we know the location of both armies on the night of the 24th, the day before the battle. The French had been at bow camp for 2 days in a tremendously advantageous position, strategically perfect for guarding the Calais Road marked in green on this map. So what happened that night? We know from French accounts that when the French vanguard left the field and retreated back into bow camp, that they left the three standards on the battlefield. They left them there, and the soldiers lit fires in front of each standard, and perhaps some more fires over towards Agincourt, and they illuminated the whole area. And there's a specific reason for that. You've got to remember something. Henry's on the run, and if the official battlefield were between Agincourt and Agincourt, Henry, during the night, could have just sneaked off along the red path that I've marked, crossed the Calais Road, down the valley, and sneaked off into the night. He could have gone round the French army completely. That's why Agincourt is not strategically important. It's of no use to the French whatsoever. So they lit the fires, sending a message to the English: you're not coming past us, you're not going to sneak past us. We've got the road. Whichever way you look at it, we've got the road and every way out of it. You can't go backwards into the winter and more death. So that's the evening of the 24th. And the English could hear the French, and the French could hear the English. They were so close to each other. There's only half a mile between Macencell and bow camp, and they could hear each other talking even. They could hear each other talking. Just a wood separating them that Quinty told us about, and that is the position on the 24th before the battle. And that is important. that strategic position there, where those three standards were left during the night, is important, because the French army in the morning walked straight back to those exact three standards. The French vanguard walked back to exactly the same position that it occupied on the 24th, the day before. So that gives you an indication of where the French put their lines in between Beaucamp and Agincourt, because that's the only way Henry can get to the Calais road. He can't go round the back of Beaucamp. He can't go between Traincourt and Agincourt because of the castle, the fortifications, and it's too narrow, it's too dangerous. So he's going trapped, and you can see what's going to happen the next day. You can already envisage where this battle is going to be the next day. On this map is an indication of where the English camped that night. You'll see it says Les Anglais, which means the English, and it's part of a series of maps that were available on a French national website. But ironically, out of the entire series, and there's many of them, there's many of these small maps, the one that's at Beaucamp is missing. It's the only one that's missing, but it's missing. And I think that's been done on purpose, because what it'd do, right, it'd completely swing the battlefield away. You see, the official narrative is that the French were camped at Traincourt and Agincourt, near Agincourt Castle. And if this plate says Les Français, right, meaning that the French camped at Beaucamp, then it gives the game away. So someone in the National Archives in France has removed the plate of Beaucamp from this particular series of maps, which is a bit naughty. But you can understand why they've done it, because they don't want us to find the official battlefield. And so we know, this is just a little bit of a backup. We know that the English camped south of Macencell, where I marked on the previous map. We know that the English camped there, and that's where they spent the night. So I just thought I'd add that bit. So we spent the next week or so discussing the possible locations of the battlefield, and this was one that we discussed in detail. This is largely based on a medieval map we found, where it's slightly different from our final position, but what it does, it uses the wood that we found on the left as Henry's left flank, and uses Agincourt as his right flank. And the distance that Henry would be defending in this situation is 1,000 yards. And we know that he would defend in 600 yards, so that his archers on both flanks would cover the middle of the battlefield. Whatever Henry has to do, whichever way he sets out his battle plan, he must ensure that his archers are in range of the middle of the battlefield. Otherwise, you leave yourself wide open to the French coming straight down the middle at you. So, if we look at this battle plan that's 1,000 yards wide, where Henry's defending, there's a problem with it. His archers are out of range of the middle of the battlefield, so you see the blue arrow coming from the French. They can march many divisions out of range of archers. In fact, they could send the cavalry straight down the middle and smash straight through Henry's lines. Remember, he had only got between 1,700 and 1,900 men at arms. The vast majority of his army were archers that were left. So if the French come down the middle, out of the range of the archers, on horse, they'll just smash straight through the English lines. There's no way the English lines have got the numbers to be able to sustain an head-on attack. So this is quite clearly not... And the other problem is that Henry's rearguard now has to defend from the direction of Traincourt and the direction of Agincourt to the south, so it'd need two rear guards. Macencell is protecting his rear, but he'd still need 2 rear guards to stop him being flanked and the enemy coming in from the rear on both sides. So this can't happen. As you can see, the big wood is bigger. I've actually made it bigger on the bottom, just at the side of Bow Camp. It's actually bigger, so that we can understand the topography of this possible scenario. We talked about this, and it's just not, as far as Henry's concerned, it's just not doable. So we discarded that, and we ended up with the next one, which is very doable. So this is basically the battlefield, the battle plan, should I say, that we came out with. And Henry is now across a 620 yard funnel. He's funneled the French into a 620 yard gap, and he only needs 1 rear guard. He's got the archers defended by Agincourt on his right and by Maisoncelles, and a smaller wood on his left. The French are now using the large wood that we talked about that was strategically important. The French are now using that as the right flank. They're using Agincourt as their left flank. And they're across basically 1,000 yards and getting funneled from 1,000 yards into a 600 yard gap. And I don't want to go too much about what happened in the battle. We already know that the cavalry attacked. It were a disaster, created a mud bath. Most of the cavalry turned around and smashed into the French vanguard, causing mayhem. Everybody knows about that, but something interesting about the way that the French set the cavalry up is they loaded the left side up with 1,200 cavalry, as opposed to 800 on the right side, on the right flank. And I think that the French saw a weakness in the English left flank. What that reason is, I'm not sure, but they obviously saw a weakness, because the French records show they loaded the left flank up with 1,200, and obviously it failed. Whatever they had in mind, what that weakness they had in mind failed miserably. But you'll notice smack in the middle of the battlefield there's a purple star. That purple star is pivotal to this whole investigation. I've put that purple star on many graphic interpretations, and it will keep appearing because it is pivotal. That will be the deciding factor on where this battlefield actually took place. So if we go on to the next slide, there's 2 stages of the battle: the cavalry attack that failed, and then there's the secondary stage of what happened after the failed cavalry. You've got to remember, at this point, the French vanguard and the French middle line have been advancing all the while towards the English, and eventually they did get to the English. So we'll just show you what happens on the second part of the battle. So here we have the second stage of battle. Once the cavalry had been dealt with and they were no longer part of this battle, the English took the rear of the archers units, swung them round and made wedges, put them in between York, Henry and Camoys. That is well known in history. By this time the vanguard had got to the English front lines and were receiving arrows from both sides and the front, point blank. In as far as how many arrows were used, you've got to remember that the English army, after everybody died of dysentery and cold and fatigue, 2,000 archers were missing from the English ranks, and the arrows that they were using were now available to the remaining archers. So in addition to the 24 arrows that each archer carries, they've got an additional 12, which gives them 36 arrows, which is about 150,000 arrows that they've got available to them. And let's suppose they fired half of them at the cavalry when the cavalry charged, so 75,000 into the cavalry. destroyed them. And then let's just say they've got another 75,000 available to fire into the French vanguard and the French middle, the French middle lines. That's going to cause a lot of damage. And when the French said that perhaps the reason that they didn't find any arrows during the survey in 2003, perhaps the reason the English pulled them all out of the ground and collected them all, and that's why they're not there. Well, Mike Loads proved that to be inaccurate, because when he did tests using arrows with an English longbow, using arrows against armour, he found that a lot of the arrows broke. You know, the shank of the arrowhead actually snapped off from the arrow shaft under point blank impacts and under impacts from 100 yards. Still resulted in the same thing. A lot of arrows broke in two. So a lot of them arrowheads went into the mud, the deep mud of the battlefield, and they will still be there to this day. So that excuse that the survey came out with was just inaccurate. But just going back to this battlefield, the vanguard and the French middle impacted each other. Well, the French middle smashed into the back of the vanguard, made it worse. They were in the mud, getting attacked by arrows on three sides, and 11,000 men perished during that period of the battle. You'll see his little purple star is still there. That's going to become relevant later. But while this was happening, the English were pulling prisoners out of the French ranks into the rear guard, and eventually Henry killed them all because of fear of a uprisal. And that's basically how we feel the topography affected this battle on that day, St. Crispin's Day, 25th of October 1415. And what we've got to do now, from this point onwards, we know where the battlefield were, we had to prove it. And that's where we're going to go next, proving everything that we've said so far. Right, part of his investigation involves learning about soil structures. This is part of my job, what I do, I spent 3 years at college studying all this kind of stuff. This first picture is a typical structure of the soil, especially in that region of Agincourt, where you've got topsoil, an intermediate layer where clay is mixed with topsoil, and then you've got clay, and then usually blue clay, shale or rock. And that is typical soil structure, which takes millions of years to form in that way. This next picture is what happens when you get a disturbance or a trauma to the normal soil structure. For example, if you had, say, 1,200 horse running along the same path and dug a channel, what they do is they bring all the clay to the surface. They completely destroy the soil structure. The land drains get smashed to pieces, the medieval land drains get smashed to pieces, and you end up with quite a mess. And the soil structure effectively becomes destroyed forever. It'll never get put back right unless a team goes in like I've done in the past and we put it right. And the next slide I'm going to show you is called a swilly. Now a swilly, you've got to be careful when you're identifying soil trauma disturbances, not to confuse them with swillies. A swilly is when you've got land sloping from both sides, and natural clay deposits, silt, gets swilled down both sides of the slope into the bottom of the valley, and they create a trap which traps water, because clay will not allow water to penetrate through it, and as a result you get standing water. And usually a typical swilly will go all the way across the base of a slope, typically 100 yards long, sometimes 50 yards long, sometimes 25 yards long, maybe 5 or 6 metres wide, or even a metre wide. You usually get a channel in a swilly. And at work, what we've done in the past to get rid of swillies is we've dug French drains the full length of the swilly, and a French drain is basically a 4 feet deep ditch full of aggregate such as brick, rubble, anything that'll drain freely, and that's how we got rid of swillies. And then put drains on top, and put land drains on top of the swilly and drained it away that way. That's how we dealt with it at work. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to look for situations where you get a trauma, and it's definitely not a swilly. Usually on a slope, if you've got a slope and you get a trauma on that slope, you can guarantee that that is not a swilly, because a swilly will not appear on a slope, because you've got a natural capillary action of the soil is to drain downwards, and a swilly will never appear on a slope, especially on a severe slope. So we have to, in our investigation, we have to look for traumas that are on slopes, look for traumas where you usually wouldn't find a trauma, disturbances in the soil from a vast army or a battle or a large amount of horse. So that's what we set off to do, and as you'll see, we succeeded, and we started to find anomalies in this battle area which were undeniable. So what are we exactly looking for? Well, if we look at Taunton, for example, you'll see a huge disturbance on the battlefield, and certain areas where the battle was the most intense, you've got huge areas of interest. And then when we move over to the Battle of Cressy, for example, which was a huge battlefield, and we look from a distance, we can see that the entire region has been affected. It's drainage, there's trauma, there's disturbances, and that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. But we have to remember that because of Henry's tactics of compressing the battlefield into a 600-yard defence, that trauma is going to be compressed into a small region. So we're looking for three basic indicators. We need the archery attack on Henry's right flank and on his left flank, and we need the major battle in the middle as Purple Star. We're looking for the Purple Star. So the way that we found the aerial shots from World War II to 2024, weren't necessarily in the order that I'm going to show you them, but I have to put context into this presentation. So this first aerial shot is Henry's right flank at the base of Agincourt. The house is at 118 metres above sea level, the first line. The trauma is at 114 metres above sea level, and the bottom line is 111 metres above sea level. So it can't be a swilly because it's on a slope. You know, you'd have natural drainage which wouldn't allow that. So this was our first discovery really, that indicated that we'd found the right side of Henry's battle formation. And although we've discovered the trauma in a field where there's no crop in it, which allowed us to be able to look at it, that trauma probably advances all the way around the bottom edge of Agincourt, which I've dotted. It's probably a much bigger trauma, but we can't see it because they keep them fields in fallow. You know, they keep them green. They have animals grazing on them. They're part of the groves of Agincourt. So we're on the trail. We found the first important link in the chain of Henry's battlefront. So basically what we did from that point is we measured roughly 600 yards, 620 yards across the front of the battlefield, and we started searching areas around there. And quite a number of days earlier we'd found an extremely disturbing trauma, which we didn't understand at first what it was. We thought initially a week earlier that it was perhaps the middle of the battlefield. We didn't understand the topography at the time, and that turned out to be Henry's left flank. Remember I said earlier that there was the French cavalry division that piled into the English left flank, got slaughtered. We found that area, and this is it right here. And what we did, or what I did, is I took the topography of the battlefield and I compared it with the modern map, and we can see that here, the two woods in the old Ordnance Survey map, and where those woods would be now on a modern map, and we found the left flank. And all we had to do from then on was to find the middle. Earlier on I told you about this map and the circumstances in which we found it, and what's important is a place called Morival. We knew this early on in his investigation, and we knew it was pivotal in finding the battlefield, because Morival quite simply means in Latin the death. And we suspected right from the beginning that La Morival was where the French vanguard and middle ranks died. The 11,000, that is where they died. The Purple Star that I've harped on about for the last section of this video that you've been watching. I've gone on about the Purple Star being important. Well, the Purple Star is Le Morival, the death. And so what we had to do, we had to go through all the aerial photography once more and find it. And we did. We found the death. It were extremely difficult to find it because there is some natural flooding of that area. But there's also anomalies that shouldn't be there, and there's a great patch in the middle, exactly where Morival is, and this is where it is, the death. So now comes the unenviable task of finding where all these poor souls are buried, 12,000 of them. It's quite impossible for the French families to come and identify them and take them away, like's been suggested by the French. Quite impossible, there's too many of them. They're disfigured, their faces are disfigured, they've got missing limbs. The only way that you can deal with this situation is to put them in graves, mass graves in situ. We know that the ground were consecrated for the burial of these men. You've got 5,000 of the nobility, knights of the realm, aristocracy, who went in the ground very close to the death, because there's no other way of doing it. We know through other battles that there's just no other way of dealing with it. So our task was to find where these poor souls lay. And a guy on the forum called Wood Butcher, he found an anomaly in the ground called Fosse de Rogner, which means the pit of anger. And you can understand why it's called the pit of anger, because the French would have been extremely angry about putting them in there, especially the nobility of France, putting them in a pit when that's not where you want to be putting your nobility, your aristocracy. So you can understand why it's called the pit of anger, and we're going to show you where it is and where it was consecrated, not at Train Court where the French said. It's actually next door to the battlefield. We searched aerial photography for hours, and Wood Butcher, a guy on the forum, he found the fosse, the pit of anger. You can understand why it's called the pit of anger. And we also found another pit to the west of the battlefield, and we think they put the nobility in one pit and the common soldiers went in the other pit, 12,000 of them, 5,000 in one pit, 7,000 in the other. Now at this point it's not particularly important to the forum exactly where the graves are. We know where they are. But the general consensus is that a lot of lads died believing, fighting for what they believed in. And we shouldn't be digging them up. If you want to pay homage to them, then leave some flowers, but don't dig them up, And it's a very touchy subject where everybody's sort of in agreement that burial sites are not to be excavated. These people died fighting for what they believed in. It's the final resting place. Please don't dig them up. And final thoughts on the whole thing is wars and battles and things like that, and the things that we do to each other as human beings are not good. And although we've spent a lot of time finding the battlefield and finding the graves just to put it to bed, really, we still feel deep down inside that this was totally unnecessary, and as human beings we shouldn't be doing this kind of thing to each other. The ferocity of battles is just disgusting. So we've got a lot of respect for the people that were involved in it, but at the same time we've also got a lot of regret of what they had to go through at the time. So those are the final thoughts of everybody. I think that it was just unfortunate that it happened, and there's a lot of people in the ground, and just respect that fact and leave them be. Take care.